Hello, my name's Eleanor and I'm the Education Manager at Benjamin Franklin House. Welcome to this week's virtual science class. And this we're looking at how Ben Franklin used his understanding of forces and also water resistance and air resistance to invent his swim fins. Now we're really looking forward to having your questions and comments during the session. If you're watching live, there are two ways that you can ask your questions. The first way is to use your raise hand button. So if you tap your screen or click your mouse, you should see some icons here at the bottom of the screen. Then my friend Caitlin, who also works at Benjamin Franklin House, will be able to unmute your microphone and then you can ask your question over the audio and I'll do my best to answer it. The second way that you can use, ask a question when you're watching live is to use your Q&A button. So once again, if you tap the screen or click your mouse and you get those pictures, you should see one with two speech bubbles. And if you press that, then you can write your question and Caitlin will read it out. And again, I'll try my best to answer. We are recording today's session, so if you're watching it later on YouTube, then you can always write questions in the comments, and you can also get in touch by sending an email to education@benjaminfranklinhouse.org. But let's get on to Ben Franklin's swim fins. So you should be able to see a picture of the swim fins on your screen now. Unfortunately, there aren't the actual swim fins that Ben Franklin writes about having created, don't exist anymore. So the ones you can see are a replica. Now, if you've tuned in to some of our other classes, we've talked about what a replica is. I wonder if there's anyone who thinks they could explain what that means if we have a replica artifact.
We have a raised hand from Jessica.
Fantastic. Hello, Jessica.
Looks like Jessica's having some problems unmuting her mic. So if anybody else would like to raise their hand. Oh, there.
There we go. Hello.
Hi. A replica is pretty much a version, a copy of something else that doesn't exist. There's a lot of copies of dinosaur bones or versions.
Fantastic. That was such a great explanation. Thank you so much for contributing. Exactly. So a replica is like a copy, and it might be a copy of something that doesn't exist anymore, just like you said, just like Ben Franklin's original swim fins. Sometimes it's a copy of something that does exist, but we make a copy so that maybe we can get it out and show it to people, and we can use it in different ways. So these replica swim fins that you can see, they're actually on display at the Benjamin Franklin Museum in Philadelphia, which is part of Independence National Historical Park. And if you ever get a chance to go to Philadelphia, I really recommend going to see it. They've got lots of great things in their exhibit. Now, so we know that Ben Franklin was very fond of swimming, which is how he came to invent the swim fins. And we know that partly because he wrote about it in his autobiography, which was a story he wrote about his life. And he also wrote about it in several letters to some of his friends. And on the bottom of the screen, you can see some writing that's been taken from one of those letters, and it describes the swim fins. And this is probably what the museum in Philadelphia used when they were creating the replica, because there's a really clear description here. So Ben Franklin says, "When I was a boy, I made two oval pallets. Each was about 10 inches long and then 6 inches broad or wide. And then he would put his thumbs through some holes. And he says that they resembled a painter's palette. So if you look at the picture again, I don't know if you've ever seen a painter's palette, but this is a piece of wood or sometimes cardboard that painters will put their paints on so that they can mix them. And if you've seen them before, you might recognize that they do look quite a lot like painter's palettes." Okay, so let's find out a bit more about why Ben Franklin was so interested in swimming, how that came to be, and also how he came to come up with the idea of the swim fins. So, although Ben Franklin spent a lot of his time in Philadelphia, and that's why there's so many museums and other things about him in that city, and he also lived in London, which is where Benjamin Franklin House, which I work for, is, and we'll talk more about that later, and in Paris, but he was born somewhere else. He was born in Boston. And so the picture on the right of your screen, that is Boston. So the buildings there are Boston. And if you know Boston today, you'll be able to see that it's the city in this picture is a lot smaller than the city today, but there is still a lot of water in and around Boston. So this probably influenced the fact that Ben Franklin ended up swimming because there was so much water around. Now, I don't know how much you know already about Ben Franklin's childhood, about his early life, but he came from a really big family. He had lots of brothers and sisters, and his parents could only afford to send him to school for 2 years. And then after that, he went and worked for his brother James, who was a printer. And that's what you can see him doing in the picture that's on the left of your screen. So that's a young Franklin working for his brother James. Now, he was an apprentice for his brother James. And an apprentice is when you are kind of in training, you're learning how to do the printing. So part of that was learning to use the printing press, which is the machine that's in that picture in the background. And that's how they used it at this time, because remember, Ben Franklin was born over 300 years ago. At this time, that's how they used to print books and newspapers. Now, I wonder if anyone knows a bit about the printing press and thinks they might be able to explain a bit about how it worked. Does anyone know anything about how the printing press would have worked?
We have a raised hand from Irene.
Fantastic. Hi, Irene.
Hi, I think the printing press would have worked where instead of the printers being small like now, the printers would be really, really huge, and they'd have to feed in these rolls of paper onto it to get enough paper to put on them. And it was so expensive to have one that it was more expensive to stop it than to keep it on rolling all the time.
Brilliant. So I think when you're describing those big rolls of paper, that sounds like a slightly more modern printing press that would have been able to use electricity. And that came after this one that you had to move by hand. So you might be able to see there's a lever there. So it was quite hard work. You had to pull the lever. And in the back of the picture on the left, you can see there's a kind of box with lots of little compartments. And in those, there would have been lots of little metal letters that Ben Franklin and other printers would have had to arrange in the order for the page, and then he would have covered them in ink. That's what he's holding. He's holding something that he would have used to spread the ink over the letters, and then he put paper down on top, and then pull the lever to press the paper down onto the ink. So it worked a bit like a stamp. Thank you so much for explaining that, Irene. Fantastic. So he was working as a printer, and we know from his autobiography that it was quite hard work. So he worked long hours, but when he wasn't working, he explained how the two things he most loved to do were reading and also exercise. And we've already spoken a bit about how there was lots of water in and around Boston, and so swimming was one of the things he loved to do. Now, at that time, so quite a long time ago, it was very uncommon for people to swim. Most people didn't know how to swim, and there weren't lots of people giving swimming lessons like there are today. So I wonder, how do you think Ben Franklin learned how to swim? If he wasn't taught by a person, how do you think he figured out how to swim? Does anyone want to have a go? Maybe they know already, or if they want to have a guess?
So we have a raised hand from Isla.
Hi, Isla.
Oh, it looks like the hand went down. Does anybody else want to raise their hand and have a go? We have Jessica.
Hi, Jessica.
Hi. My guess was a book. I'm guessing that he learned from a book.
You're spot on. Well done. Excellent guessing. We'd already mentioned how he loved books, and he taught himself a lot from them, including how to swim. He used a book called The Art of Swimming. Thanks so much, Jessica. So he learned how to swim, and once again at the bottom of the screen we have some writing from a letter to a friend. This was to his friend Jacques Barbe Dubois, and actually this letter was originally written in French because Ben Franklin learned how to speak French, which was useful when he went to live in Paris later. And the writing's a bit old-fashioned, but he basically describes how the swim fins, or the pallets as he called them, helped him. So by attaching them to his hands and pulling them through the water, he could go faster, although he does say that that tired his wrists out a little bit. And he even says that he tried experimenting also with putting some wood on his feet, a bit like a kind of sandals, but he didn't think that that worked so well. So in a way, as well as the swim fins, he did also create a kind of very early version of the type that we wear on our feet. Does anyone know what we call the thing we put on our feet to help us swim? We don't call them swim fins, we call them something a bit different.
We have in the Q&A, we have somebody who says flippers.
Exactly, fantastic. And we're going to look a bit later about how the design changed and what they look like now. Exactly, flippers, fantastic. So the swim fins and the early version of flippers were not the only thing that Ben Franklin used to help him swim faster. So as you can see in this picture on the screen, he also used a kite to help him. Now, this picture I've taken from, it was produced by More Perfect Union, and it was made for the Benjamin Franklin Tercentenary traveling exhibition, which was called Benjamin Franklin in Search of a Better World. Now, Tercentenary means that was when we celebrated what would have been Franklin's 300th birthday if he was still alive today. So if he was born in 1706, can anyone work out what year it would have been when we celebrated what would have been his 300th birthday? So 300 years on from 1706. When would that have been? Anyone have a go at the maths?
We have a raised hand from Isla again.
Hi, Isla.
Oh, I'm sorry, Isla. It looks like it's not allowing me to unmute you. If you want to put your answer in the Q&A or the chat. 2006.
Fantastic, you're spot on, exactly. So 2006 was when they had this amazing exhibition that traveled all around the world, and there's actually still a website that's really great, has lots of information, also great images and activities you can complete. And that website, if you're interested in checking it out, is www.benfranklin300.org. And 2006 was also the year that Benjamin Franklin House in London opened as a museum and an education facility, and I'll come on to tell you a bit more about that in a moment. But we've also got some writing on the screen. So this is from that same letter to Ben Franklin's French friend, and this is where he describes how he came to have the idea to use the kite. So first of all, he was a young boy and he'd been out playing with his kite, but then decided to go swimming. So he attached it to some wood by the pond he was swimming in, and as he was swimming, he was looking at how the kite was flying in the air, and it was almost a light bulb moment. He thought, okay, I can use this to help me swim. So he took it off and still kept a bit of the wood, a bit like a handle, and then he describes how he lay on his back and holding the kite, that helped pull him all the way across the pond, and he said it was very agreeable, so that means he enjoyed it. Okay, so now we know more about the history of how Franklin came to be interested in swimming and how he came to invent his swim fins and also experiment with using a kite. We're going to think a bit about as he got a bit older, because this was all when he was a boy living in Boston. You'll probably be happy to hear that as Ben Franklin grew up, he didn't stop swimming. He kept swimming for a long time, and he came to live in London 2 times in his life. So the first time he came, it was 1724, and he was 18 years old. And he writes about how when he came that time, he used to swim in the River Thames, which is the big river that runs through the centre of London. And that's what you can see in the picture on the bottom right of the screen. So it's a really big river, and it's pretty dirty today, and it probably would have been quite dirty then. There's also quite strong currents, so it would have been difficult to swim in. And you can see from that picture that London was quite a bit bigger than Boston, but it was still nowhere near as big as it is today. There are a lot more bridges now and big buildings as well, much taller buildings. So he did swim on his first visit to London, and that first time he came, it was to learn more about printing because he wanted to move to Philadelphia and set up his own printing press. Remember, he'd started off working with his brother, but he wanted to make his own in Philadelphia. And then when he came back the second time, that was in 1757, and he was an older man then. He was middle-aged, and that's around the time that the portrait of Franklin you can see on the screen. So at the top right, that's around the time that this was painted. So that's when he came to live in London, and this time he lived at 36 Craven Street, which is the building you can see on the left of the screen, and that's the building we call Benjamin Franklin House today. And I very much hope that at some point when we reopen, you'll all be able to come and visit us if you haven't already. So at that time when he came in 1757 and he was living at 36 Craven Street, he was a politician mostly. He was also doing some science, but most of the time he was working as a politician. So he didn't have, unfortunately, so much time for swimming. So we've learned all about Ben Franklin and swimming and how he came to invent the swim fins and also use a kite with his swimming. So let's now look at a bit more closely at the science behind Benjamin Franklin's ideas and also how these inventions came to develop. We've talked in some of our previous lessons about how that's always happening with inventions. They tend to not just stay as they're first invented, but as technology improves and develops, more scientists will come and improve them and develop them. But if you really have liked hearing about Ben Franklin and swimming, you might be pleased to hear that the Lady Joan Reed Children's Author in Residence that we have at Ben Franklin House, Professor Sarah Pomeroy, is working on a book all about Ben Franklin and his swimming, which is for young readers. So keep an eye on our website to hear more news of that soon. And our website is www.benjaminfranklinhouse.org. But let's get on to the science. Okay, so Ben Franklin really used his understanding of forces and particularly water resistance to help him develop the idea of the swim fins. So he really admired another famous scientist who was called Sir Isaac Newton. He was a bit older than Franklin, and he'd written a lot about forces. So Franklin knew a lot because he'd read a lot of what Sir Isaac Newton had said, and maybe you've learned about forces already. So I wonder if anyone could try and explain what they think forces are. How can we describe forces?
No raised hands or comments in the chat yet.
It is quite a tricky question. So maybe I'll get started, and if you do want to add anything to what I say, then please do raise your hand or put it in the Q&A box. So we can describe forces as pushes and pulls. And you can't see forces when they're acting, but what you can see is the effect they're having on objects. So they might change the speed of an object, they might change its direction, they might even change its shape. So for example, when you pull an elastic band, it stretches. So your force of the pull is changing its shape. Now, we're using forces when we're swimming because as you move your arms and also your legs through the water, you're pushing water out of the way. And I mentioned Sir Isaac Newton. He said that for every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. So because you're pushing the water out of the way, that then, in this direction, that then pushes you forward in the other direction. And so when you have swim fins on your hands or what would become flippers on your feet, that helps you do that because you're increasing the surface area. So you're pushing more water out of the way, and then that gives you more thrust or propulsion forward. So we've got quite a few pictures on the screen. The gentleman on the left who's got his swim fins and flippers, this is Louisa Collier. And he was the gentleman, he was born about 100 years after Franklin died, so he wasn't alive at the same time, but he invented the modern version of the swim fins and of flippers. And he was in the Navy, so he spent a lot of time at sea. which maybe was one of the things that got him thinking about these things. So you can see probably from the colourful pictures at the bottom of the screen that actually the design for swim fins for your hands hasn't changed an awful lot since Ben Franklin invented them, but the flippers on the left, those do look quite different to the sandals that he described. And then if we look up at the animals at the top of the screen, we've got a penguin and a frog, and Louisa Collier was really inspired by nature, and he took that shape of the webbed foot that we see in lots of animals like penguins and frogs that can swim well in water, and he used that to invent his version of the flippers. So that's how the swim fins and the flippers have evolved and changed and improved. Let's look now at how Ben Franklin's kite idea has changed. So this time he was also using his understanding of forces, but we were thinking more about air resistance. So a bit like when you're moving your hands and your legs through the water, you're pushing the water back. When the kite is being held, it's pushing air back, and then so you're being pulled by it. So although we don't see many people swimming with kites, that idea has been developed by scientists to create lots of different water sports, which you can see some pictures of on the screen. So on the left, we've got kite surfing, and then we've got windsurfing, and also sailing. So that brings us on to the point in the class where we're going to do a demonstration. So we're going to be making some paper sailing boats together. And we're going to be doing that just using some paper, and I'll show you exactly what you're going to need. And there's quite a few steps, so I'm going to do it. I'm going to make myself big and do it for you and show you. But if you needed to see it again, we've already put up a little video of how to do it, and also these visual instructions that you can see on the screen. They are on our website on the event page for this lesson. So if you need to watch it again, it's there ready for you to have a go. So let's get started. Right, so to make your paper boat, you're going to need some paper, some straws, tape, and some scissors. And then once you've made the boats, you're going to want to try floating them, so in a container of water, but we'll come back to that later. So very first thing you want to do is take just one sheet of paper, and then we're going to want, at the moment it's a rectangle shape, but we're going to want to turn it into a square. So to help you do that, the easiest way is to take one of the corners and fold it over to meet the other side of the paper. So I've done that, and then if I open that out, we can see that makes a square. So I'm going to cut along here, along this line, and then I'm going to keep this spare paper because we're going to use that later. Okay, great. So you should have a square. The next thing we need to do is we're going to fold it in half. So I'm going to fold it like this, but making sure the two edges meet. So now I folded it in half. It's gone back to being a rectangle, a longer rectangle. So if I open it up, we now need to fold it the other way. Also in half again, making sure the edges meet up. And then if I unfold it, you should be able to see a kind of cross of creases in the middle. Okay, so the next stage is we're going to fold in the edges to meet the middle line. Okay, so I'll do that on one side to show you what I mean. So I've folded in the edge to meet the middle line, and I'm going to do that on the other side as well. Okay, so now our paper should look like this, a long rectangle, and we're going to fold over the four corners of the rectangle. So it's going to make some triangle shapes, okay? So each of the four corners. There's one of them, and I'm going to repeat that with the other three. Okay, so now we've made a hexagon shape. So we've folded over those corners, and the next thing we want to do is fold these corners into the middle line. So I'll show you one, and then I'll do that, repeat that for the other three. So I folded one in, and it's going to eventually make a diamond shape out of the paper. Okay, so now we've got a diamond, bit of revision of our shapes as well. So now I'm going to fold in these 2 points so that they meet the middle line. Okay, so now my paper's all folded up. And I know that was a lot of steps, so don't worry if you haven't been able to follow with the video. As I said, there's a clip on our website and the visual instructions, and we'll also be posting this whole lesson on our website tomorrow. So it's all folded up, and now this is the tricky bit. We're going to need to turn it inside out. So you have to be quite gentle, quite delicate, so that you don't rip the paper. So I'm just turning this inside out. Okay, so we've made the body or the hull of the boat. And thinking again about water resistance, so we spoke about how the swim fins and flippers, that increases resistance and helps us to propel ourselves forward. But we also want to think about how streamlined we are. So animals like penguins, they're really streamlined, that the water can move very smoothly over their shape. And as swimmers, we can make ourselves more streamlined if we wear a wetsuit. And then if we think about the shape of a boat, that's partly why they have these points at the end to help them move quickly through the water. So we've made the body of the boat. The next thing we need to do is take one of our straws, and we're going to use the tape to attach that in the middle of the boat, and that's going to be like our mast on a sailing boat, which the sail's going to go on. So it shouldn't take too much tape. Yes?
We had a raised hand from Zane. Yep, I'll just call.
Absolutely. Hello, Zane.
I couldn't get all the steps.
Oh, yes. Sorry, I know there are a lot of steps. So I'm going to just finish this off now. But after the live class finishes, if you go to our website, so www.engineeringhouse.org, if you look at events, you should be able to find this swim fins. And on there's a video clip of the steps again, and also some instructions that have all the drawings to help you see exactly what you need to follow. I hope that will help you have a go after finished. Okay, so I'm going to attach my mask now, and this is I'm ready to we're going to use this, attach it. So it's a sail. And then you may want to make a couple of boats. So I have one from earlier. And you might want to experiment with different sizes and shapes of sail and seeing how, whether it having a bigger surface area, so having more paper, if that means that the boat's going to travel faster when you create some wind, which you can do by taking another straw. And if you blow through the straw, then you can create some of your own wind. So I'm just going to attach this sail to the mast with my tape again. Okay, so now I've got my two boats, and the hulls are the same, but we've got different sails, because when you're doing an experiment, you want to make sure you're just changing one thing. So the thing that we're changing is the sail. So we want to make sure we use the same size of paper and same type of paper for the body of the boat to make it a really fair experiment. So this is where you're going to need a container of water. Now, because I'm just at my kitchen table, I've got a small plastic container, but it would be even better if you could use something a bit bigger, like a sink or a bathtub, or even a paddling pool if you have one. So what you would do is then you can put the boat in the water. Okay, and then you take your straw and you can create some wind and see how quickly it can travel and whether there's a difference between different designs. Now, the boats won't survive too long in the water since they're made of paper, but they should last long enough for you to have a race and for you to compare how the different sails make a difference to the speed of the boat. So I realized there are a lot of steps to follow there, but as I explained, if you go to our website, there's the video clip to watch and also the visual instructions, and we'll put this whole lesson on our website as well tomorrow. But did anyone have any questions they wanted to ask us before the end of the class?
No questions so far.
Okay, well, thank you so much for joining us and for joining in with your answers to questions and for asking questions too. Hope you enjoyed it. We do have another class scheduled for this time next Tuesday, which is all about Ben Franklin and the Gulf Stream. So thinking about energy. And we'll hope you'll be able to join us for that. We're also going to be planning some more classes taking us through June as well. So keep an eye out on our website for more news of those too. And on our website, as well as the resources for the boat making that I mentioned, we have some other things you can use, and we have the recordings of all our other classes. So do check those out. If you would like to make a donation to Benjamin Franklin House to help support the work that we do, you can also do that on our website. But goodbye for now, and we hope to see you again soon. Thanks again.